because the jobs that I've had before, I never really felt fulfilled or that I really enjoyed them. Like, sure, there is certain satisfaction for when you feel like you're good at your job at a certain level, but it's still not, it wasn't enough for me. So I think if you do something you love, if you love your job, and if you're working in a working environment that's not toxic in any way, that's enjoyable, in a lot of ways, that should be the priority. Sure, you know, salary, earning a good salary, we all gotta, you know, eat and live and pay the bills and things like that. But honestly, for me now, it comes, well, not even maybe second or third on the list. Like the priority is doing something you love, when not having a sort of sensation where you dread going to work every day. You know what I mean? So, and I think I have that now. So.
We're going. All right, Khalil, thank you so much for reaching out to me. Khalil sent me an email explaining a lot of things about himself. So we're going to be chatting through all of it today, or as much as possible. First of all, sir, would you mind just introducing yourself for the people who are watching?
Absolutely. My name is Khalil. I am 31 years old. I teach English, ESL, at a language school here in Casablanca, Morocco, where I've lived for almost 18 years now. I'm Moroccan born and bred, so I'm actually not a native speaker of English. Actually, English is my third language, so it's not even my second language. So.
That's awesome. Great. Well, actually, my French teacher, Nuela, she's from Morocco as well. I learned with her on iTalki.
Okay.
And she's from Casablanca. She's from the exact same city as you, born and bred. So it's great to chat to somebody else from Morocco.
Here, I thought I was special. I thought I was going to be the first person from Casablanca you're talking to.
maybe the first English teacher, but yeah, Nuela teaches French. Okay, well, anyway, you do have a very unique story, because actually one of the things that I find attractive about your story is that you are still in the process of getting started on iTalki, right? You're a new teacher.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I do have experience teaching English, but most of that experience so far has been face-to-face teaching. So the first time I ever taught online was as part of my job with the same language school where I teach, where when the pandemic happened, as I'm sure is the case with a lot of people, we had to transition to using, you know, working online basically for everything, for meetings, for teaching, everything else. Yeah, so now that I have had I have had that experience and that I started developing skills as far as teaching online goes, I am considering it as a real well, way to sort of develop as a teacher while also earning some supplementary income, I guess. Yeah,
of course.
it's always nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that was kind of my plan with iTalki when I got started. And then I ended up getting hooked, right? And now it's pretty much, I'm studying as well, but it's a strong part-time gig for sure. Yeah, so just to clarify, you are a well-experienced and well-qualified teacher. You have your CELTA. We'll talk a little bit about your teaching, like language teacher preparation in a moment, but just a little bit more on getting started online. I'd like to hear from the horse's mouth how you feel, if there are any kind of things that you are really looking forward to, or any things you're apprehensive about, because to be honest with you, this is a very normal part about getting started online, or getting started even not just online, but in one-to-one classes. Those are different from group classes. So how are you feeling?
I was gonna say, yeah. Yeah, so exactly as you've said, there are two things to consider here. So I don't have extensive experience teaching online, so it's still newer to me, and I also don't have extensive experience teaching one-to-one lessons, and that can be quite different than being in a classroom sitting and having multiple students. So there are a lot of like, I'm still learning, but I think in terms of so when you have a classroom full of students, the activities that you can do, in my mind, or at least because I think it's because I'm more experienced in that way, it just seems like you have more of a choice. You can there is more of more opportunities for the students to speak, I suppose, and to get so speaking to different people, mingling, rather than just having that one person that you have to, you know, bounce off of all the time and, you know, speak to all the time. So so yeah, it will be an adjustment for me, and I'm hoping that yeah, just to get some experience and like try and adapt to that as quickly as possible. So.
Yeah, it will be, you know, a transition for sure. From my experience, I found that the experience of actually going online was a lot more of a shift than the experience of going from group classes to one-on-one classes, right? Because I had zero to no experience. I had, you know, let's rewind 2 years ago when I first started on iTalki, I had 95% group class experience, and all of it was in person, right? Over the 3 years that I was teaching. So I was a little bit apprehensive of the one-to-one experience, but you know, that was a lot easier, I found, than just the modality of speaking online. And I think one of the big things for me was the tech, right? Because I was living in Ireland, and my part of Ireland had an awful internet connection. Like the internet connection was brutal. And there was basically nothing I could do about it. But that's just the way it was. So I find that for me, you know, tech was a real thing I had to think of, but also, you know, finding resources and learning from other people's stories. So I'd like to know, what are you doing? Because this could help other teachers who are watching this, who haven't started on iTalki or who are just getting started. What are you doing to try to like prepare yourself for this new experience?
Well, the first thing that I thought of is to try and find resources and find out, well, to find other teachers who have taught on iTalki. And that's how I found you, and I found your YouTube channel. So I've been watching a lot of your videos recently. And well, generally speaking, I think I've realized that a lot of the things that I already use in a classroom settings can be sort of converted to a one-to-one setting. I've read a few articles about this, and it's, while it is different, it's I think the biggest difference is that you play a lot more hands-on role as a teacher, and your TTT, well, you'll be familiar with the term, I guess, of the teacher talking time. I would imagine would increase a lot, since you are the only person the students will be able to have a conversation with, and that's the goal for, especially if it's a speaking centered lesson. So yeah, I'm just expecting a lot more speaking. I'm expecting to play the I very rarely have had, for example, when organizing a role play as part of a lesson, I almost never take part in a classroom session, since the students can role play with each other, for example. That's not going to be the case with one-to-one learning. So you'll have to do, as a teacher, I think you have to do a lot of, yeah, heavy lifting in terms of like getting the student talking, and like,
Yeah, for sure, definitely. And I found that teacher talk time, like the importance of this ratio and the overall significance of this ratio, sort of went out the window when I started on iTalki, right? And not in a bad way, but actually in a good way. Because when I started in Thailand, our teacher education and the job, actually, because I did my TESOL and we'll talk about your teacher education in a moment, but that all was heavily centered on, you know, on the ratio between teacher talk time, student talk time. But when you're on iTalki, you know, if you're having a conversation with a student, a lot of your students, first you need to know what they want, right? But a lot of them, what they want is authentic conversation. Like they're speaking to a buddy, right? And in a lot of situations, you do become some sort of yeah, let's just say, like, friend is kind of a taboo word, but I've spoken about other
Mm.
interviewees about this week as well, how some of your students do become very close to you, right? And you talk about all sorts of things, so they do become friends. Not all of them, and that's why it's good to find out what your students want and what their expectations are. But
Yeah,
it really was, for me, it was shocking because I was used to teaching like teenagers, group classes. Okay, maximize that student talk time. And when I was on iTalki,
mm,
some of my students don't want that. And as you said, you have to do some heavy lifting just to get them talking for some of them,
yeah.
right? So yeah, a
Yes,
shift.
I'd like to corroborate your point. Sorry if I'm interrupting, but I just want to say
No.
that's exactly as you talked about when you did your certification. When I, as part of CELTA, there was a very big focus on limiting teacher talking. And I can understand the reasoning behind that. I can imagine that, well, teachers can potentially get bogged down in terms of giving instructions and just talking a lot about the topic of the lesson, where it might even get to, it would border on being a lecture rather than a lesson, you know. So that's, I can understand where in a classroom setting, you don't want that. And it's, but I even in a one-to-one setting, I think it's as long as you're sort of eliciting from the student, encouraging the student to get the ball rolling, and to, as long as you're not so much trying to lead the conversation, and I think it's not a huge deal if you're speaking, let's say, the same amount that the student is speaking. So
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, it's a very case by case basis, and you'll find that on iTalki as well. Like, scaffolding the language with the students,
mm,
but definitely the elicitation is really important as well. And you find strategies to do that as well. And as you said, a lot of what you have in class, you'll be able to adapt it in your one-to-one online lessons. Have you started, by the way, Khalil? Have you taught any classes?
no, not yet, no. I still haven't got the application stuff sorted out yet, so yeah.
Well, you have signed up for an interview, and that is just incredible because I thought to myself, I was like, if this was me getting started on iTalki and like somebody on YouTube asked me, do you want to have an interview talking about online English teaching or English teaching in general, I would be like, I have enough on my plate, man. No, thank you. But again, just another thank you for coming on here, because I think it takes a lot of guts to
Absolutely.
get started online and also to have an interview about it. But
My
that's great.
pleasure.
And also vice versa, you could adapt a lot of the skills that you will learn online to the classroom, right? So a lot of
Mhm.
teachers who have had to develop these skills over the pandemic, a lot of them have gone back to the classroom and have actually said, like, this has helped me with X, Y, and Z, or X, Y, and Z. So hopefully that would be useful to you as well. Do you plan to
Mhm.
return to the classroom, like in-person teaching after?
Yes, so far I don't really have plans to sort of transition completely into online teaching. I'm, let's say, testing the waters, so to speak.
Yeah, nice,
And
nice, nice.
so yeah, I don't know if well, I guess I'll just see how I like it, because so far I absolutely do love my job as far as teaching English goes. And I guess we'll transition into that conversation later, because as I've told you in the email, I haven't always been an English teacher. I have a different background. So yeah, it's all about trying out new things. I love teaching in the classroom face to face as well. We'll see which which one I'll stick with on sort of transition into, or keep with. Yeah.
Exactly, man. You might fall in love. It's really hard to say, right? But then there are a lot of teachers who say, "Oh, I can't stand Zoom. Get it the heck away from me. I want to go back into the classroom," right? So, if like, who knows? And I'm going to be emailing you probably a couple months from now to see how you're doing, and you're free to check up anytime, because I really hope things go well.
Thank
One
you.
more question before we speak about your alter ego, or your former self, I guess we could say. Why iTalki? Why did you choose to teach on iTalki, Khalil? Oh,
Hmm. Oh, I
good.
think we've lost each other for a second there. Now we're good, I think. Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
no
all
problem.
good. Okay. All
So
right. Yeah.
my question was, why did you choose iTalki to apply to of all the other kind of platforms?
Hmm. Well, there are a couple of reasons. I've known about iTalki for a while, actually, being an avid language learner and lover. I remember back when iTalki was a language exchange community primarily. It wasn't a teaching platform. So I've used it back then when I was learning Spanish and Japanese and things like that. So uh, there is that sort of brand recognition, I guess, and the fact that it was useful and the community was great back when I was actively learning languages. The other reason is that I did some research and I found a lot of positive feedback about iTalki compared with other platforms. The fact that I've heard a lot of people say that the algorithm is quite fair, that you can actually start having your lessons booked, and as long as you market yourself properly, yeah, there's a lot of potential to grow in iTalki. And the other thing is the competitive rates as well in terms of commissions. I think other websites such as Preply, they have higher fees, so that also plays a part. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And I've spoken with a few interviewees about the pros of Preply as well, and where it's actually better than iTalki. But of course, the commission rate is, for a lot of teachers, one of like the real kind of decisive points. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, great. I was just curious because for me, when I started on iTalki, I actually got rejected by probably a good 3 or 4 other platforms beforehand, and all of them were for
Oh,
teaching kids. They were like Chinese-based, English teaching,
mm,
like for kids. And honestly, I am not interested in teaching kids at all. So I think this is the best thing
right.
that could have happened, because a lot of the students, not all, but a lot of them on iTalki are adults or teenagers.
Yeah.
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 Okay, excellent, good stuff. Let's move on. But before we forget, let's take that bookmark out on supply chain management. Your former self. Could you tell us how the
Yes.
heck you became an English teacher after that?
Well, so I think I'll have to go back. So even back when I was a high school student, I always loved languages in general, and English. I uh, learned English mostly, I would say my English is mostly self-taught. We did have English classes at school and in high school. They weren't really up to par, if I'm honest with you. So I learned English mostly by watching films, playing video games, that sort of thing, where it's almost like learning by immersion, despite the fact that I've never been to an English speaking country, like still. So, so that's, so in terms of my own passions, it's mainly to do with language learning and things like that. So if it weren't for, let's say, social pressure and peer pressure back in high school, I wouldn't have studied supply chain management or marketing or things that I studied later on. I think partly as well because of the opportunities being a little bit more limited in my country than abroad. So I found a few BA programs back then in countries like France and Sweden, where you can do things like study to become an interpreter or a translator. I actually was looking into things to do with language even back then. So, or even there is a BA that I remember specifically in France, which is about Japanese culture or studies or something like this, social studies to do with. And I am a big fan of Japan, and that's why I've learned the language and like Japanese culture. So those were the things that would have been very sort of appealing to me from a things that I'm that I'm actually passionate about, rather than just because there is a sort of pressure, like I mentioned earlier, to just, go into a good school, study something that affords opportunities, job opportunities after graduating. So yeah, you have things like family and friends and people pushing you into those paths. But what I've come to realize now that I have become an English teacher now, because the jobs that I've had before, I never really felt fulfilled or that I really enjoyed them. Like, sure, there is certain satisfaction for when you feel like you're good at your job at a certain level, but it's still not, it wasn't enough for me. So I think if you do something you love, if you love your job, and if you're working in a working environment that's not toxic in any way, that's enjoyable, in a lot of ways, that should be the priority. Sure, salary, earning a good salary, we all gotta, eat and live and pay the bills and things like that. But honestly, for me now, it comes, well, not even maybe second or third on the list. Like, the priority is doing something you love, when not having a sort of sensation where you dread going to work every day. You know what I mean? So, and I think I have that now. So
That's excellent. Well, congratulations. And you're
thank you.
31, right? And you made
Yes, I
this
am.
transition. That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was 25 when I sat for myself, when I did my CELTA course. Yeah, when I took my CELTA
Wow,
course.
excellent. Okay. Let's yeah, that's right. We all got to make money. We all got to eat. Let's not eat grandma though. I see that that shirt you're wearing right there.
Yeah.
Okay, what well, let's talk about CELTA then. Let's move on to that. So, could you
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about where you completed the course, what the course was like, if there was anything that
sure.
they didn't include in the course that they should have, for example?
Mm. Well, I completed the course at the British Council here in Casablanca in Morocco. So I didn't
Mm.
travel far for that, just and going into the course, I think most of my CELTA mates were already English teachers. I remember it was myself and a couple of others who were coming from completely different professions. So that was already quite daunting, as I had never done any teaching before the course. And I had to, as I mentioned earlier, my English is mostly self-taught. I've learned just by sort of immersion. And so I've had to do a lot of diving into grammar, a way a native speaker would do when they want to learn about the grammar of the language. And I was almost converting some grammar elements from French, because growing up, I studied French from a young age, as all Moroccans do at school. So I did have to study French grammar and all of those things, but I never had done that for English. So as I'm doing my CELTA, or as I was preparing to do my CELTA, I found myself having to read grammar books and articles and things like that, just to sort of have that base and try to catch up with all of the other people doing the CELTA course who are already English teachers and already familiar with those concepts. So so
That
in
is a
terms of
great point. Oh, sorry. I'll let you
no,
finish that,
no,
but
go ahead.
then we'll come back to. Okay, all right, cool. So basically,
Yeah.
I've never even I guess I've thought about it like maybe like subconsciously, but I have never
Mhm.
actually like really kind of put emphasis on the difference of the struggles that new teachers going into teacher education programs like CELTA,
Mhm.
TEFL, TESOL, TESOL, how their experience could be different from teachers who already have some experience but just need to get the
Yeah.
piece of paper, right? And this is actually a really good point, because like this is something that I'm just learning, that I'm really thinking about right now, about how if you're going into to the British Council in Casablanca, and you're one of the only people who have not taught before, and especially
Mm.
if you're coming from a different domain and a different just kind of working culture, so you're not fresh out of university, you've actually kind of gone into the workforce and now you're going into a different domain. Wow, that must
Yeah,
be challenging in some ways. Perhaps it could be liberating in some ways as well. Mhm.
absolutely. It was challenging in the sense that was still sort of questioning myself, even as I got accepted into the course, and as the course was about to start. And I was thinking, is this really for me? Is it something that, am I going to be, so first of all, is it really for me?
Mhm.
Secondly, will I really be able to cut it as a
Mhm.
teacher? I've never taught before. I don't have any experience. Am I sort of made to be a teacher or not? So, but thankfully, as the course started, even through the first week, I found myself enjoying it a lot. And the tiniest bit of feedback, or especially positive feedback from the mentors, it just boosted my confidence immensely, because it's something I hadn't done before. So I needed that validation for someone to tell me, yes, you're doing a good job. This is so.
Awesome stuff.
So
And
yeah,
what do you think now? Are you made to be a teacher now? Do you think so?
I believe so.
Yeah,
Yes.
awesome. That's great. That's fantastic. You could continue. I interrupted you.
So in terms of things that we learned on the CELTA, which was your question, I think I didn't finish answering before. So uh, I think the CELTA is a very good starting point, even though, as I mentioned, a lot of the people who were doing CELTA with me were English teachers already. A lot of their feedback was that uh, they didn't, they were sort of going at it blindly, so to speak, before doing an actual certification, before learning some actual, methodology. And one other thing that I like about CELTA is that it encourages you to question things as a teacher. So things are not just handed to you on a plate. You have to do your own research. You have to learn about the reasoning behind different methodologies and different ways of teaching. But you're also encouraged to experiment with different ways of teaching, as long as you can back up something that you've tried, something new that you've tried in the classroom, with either solid reasoning of your own, or perhaps evidence from a certain ELT book or an ELT teacher, etc. So I think it does give you a solid foundation to start and to go out there and experiment and grow as a teacher.
That's great. And for you to see other English teachers who are noting their own places, areas for growth and potentials for growth,
Mm.
that should hopefully be reassuring to you as somebody who was going into it, straight from a different domain or a different field, right? So it's kind of
Yes.
like, the imposter syndrome is a little bit not as bad if everybody has it, I guess.
Yeah,
And if
absolutely.
it's openly known, it could
Yeah.
make the process a
If
bit
you're,
easier.
yeah,
Okay,
if we're
excellent.
all more or less in the same boat.
Yeah, you're all in the same
Yeah.
boat for sure. All right, great. Well, you seem like a calm guy, you seem like a patient guy, and I think it's great that you have the experience of learning languages. So, two questions. First of all, noted that you were learning Japanese before, um,
Mm.
Spanish. You, s- I'm guessing that French is one of your first languages, unless if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a first language. It's my second language that we learn starting, primary or elementary school. All Moroccans do. Not everyone picks it up at the same rate, but it's also the main language for business here in Morocco. So it's a very sought after language if you want to get a job. uh, Almost doing anything in an office, you have to be able to speak French in this country. And the same with higher studies, for example, universities and things like that. Most you can study. There are some fields and domains where you have a choice. For example, if you want to study law, you can study law in Arabic or you can study law in French. But business and technology and science, it's all in French after high school. So everyone who's hoping to get a university education has to have a solid level of French, basically. So that is where my French comes from. And throughout my life, for half my life, the only two languages that I could speak were Arabic and French. So my French was a lot stronger than my English, obviously, when I started learning English. But I feel like it's starting to slip away now, since I don't really use it. To the point where I started looking for opportunities to use it. During the first lockdown and things like that, when I had free time, I would join language exchange, Zoom language exchange meetings to practice my French. And so there were those meetings where it's you have French speakers who want to practice their English and English speakers want to practice their French, and you just talk about a certain topic. And everybody would be surprised when they find out that I'm Moroccan, but I'm not here to practice my English and I'm not helping people with French. I'm actually here to practice my French, or just to sort of, just to use the language, because I feel like if you don't use it, you lose it. That's how it works with languages. So.
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting. So why have you chosen to teach English instead of teaching French or Arabic or any other language that you may know?
Well, as I mentioned before, my sort of relationship with English started all the way back when I had just joined high school, I guess. I found myself transitioning into using English as a language online, basically, like I mentioned earlier, with video games and things like that. And I used to watch, like, if I would watch an American movie, I'd either watch it French dubbed or in English with French subtitles. And at one point, I transitioned everything to English subtitles because I found that helped with the language. And so going into university, even though I did my studies in French, I was in a lot of, I was doing a lot of extracurricular activities based on the English language. I headed an English club at the school. I was head of an debating club. So I was in charge of the English cell. You could debate in French or in Arabic. And then I started the English one at university. I was with a organization called ISEC, which is a student exchange, or rather for internships for students and fresh graduates. And the main language in this organization, it's an international organization, and everything is done in English in this organization as well. So I was doing a lot of things in English. I was speaking English almost as much as I was speaking French, even though all of my studies were done in French. So I guess I just, at one point, the paradigm shifted and I started being more confident speaking English than I was speaking French. So.
Wow, what a multilingual experience. That is awesome, Khalil. That's great. So you applied to iTalki just to teach English, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, that's great. If anybody wants to learn English, then definitely check out Khalil's profile. I'm going to put a link to it just in the box below. If you have a couple minutes, sir, I'd love to ask you a couple more questions, as long as time permits. That's okay. All right, sweet. So let's talk about, there are a couple things I'd love to touch on. First, native speakerism or non-native speakerism. And I also want to talk about, what you've said about having these language exchanges online, because I know it's not only teachers who are watching some of my videos, it's also learners, right? And a lot of the teachers on iTalki are avid language learners. There are many polyglots on iTalki, actually. So I want to talk about language exchanges, because this is something I used to do on iTalki when they were a little bit more language exchange oriented. Like, you would go on the forum and you would kind of
Yes.
put, oh yeah, my name's Ryan, I'm learning French, like reach out to
Yeah.
me. And you know, like, let's be real, that could be terrifying for some people. Like, I remember at the beginning, I was like, who am I going to see on the other side of that screen? Because it's like, you're literally, it's not as transparent as it is with a teacher, and you're booking well, in some ways it could be. It depends how transparent your language partner is, and what their expectations are, and how experienced they are in language learning with an exchange partner. But there are situations where I would kind of go in, and there was like nobody knew what was going to happen, and there, like, both of us are kind of new at this. And you know, some people would last for a long time. I talk to them every week for a few months, and some people you just see them once and then you won't see them again. So I wonder if you could put us, just in a nutshell, what your experience has been like with your language exchange partners.
Well, very similar to what you just described, to be honest. It's one thing that I really liked about it is, even back when my English wasn't as advanced, and so if I, like you said, I would try and organize a language exchange with someone, either to learn English or Japanese, or, and when you go into this experience, it's just as you said, you don't know exactly how it's going to go, but it sort of requires a lot of patience to have two people who don't quite speak the other language try to communicate in that language. So, but when you both realize that you're in the same situation, you can help each other. You have that incentive to be patient with the other person, and to so it could take, let's say, for example, a long time just to find a word and to finish a sentence in that language and to say what you're meaning to say. But you know that your interlocutor, the person you're speaking with, is going to be patient with you because they have an incentive to do so. They also expect you to do the same for them. So as teachers, we get paid for this, but as a language learner, when it's an exchange, the payment is the other language that you're receiving
Yeah.
as a sort of and I think it has a lot to do with motivation. So when you have people who are truly passionate about languages, all of the polyglots you've spoken about, for example, when you have that sort of intrinsic motivation, you're not just learning, let's say, English because your boss said you'll get a promotion if your English becomes better or something. Not that that's a bad reason to do it, but it's just a different sort of motivation. Whereas when you're learning it for the love of the language, and it means a lot to you to see that progress happen. Those are the people who stick with it longer. As you said, there are some people where you try it a couple of times and either they don't have the patience for it, or it gets or sometimes it's about confidence, so they sort of, their confidence gets a little bit destroyed. I don't think that's the right word. Not well.
Damaged
Yeah,
a bit. Yeah.
damaged a bit, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, it's yeah, like, it's a tough thing, right? I mean, motivation is very important, emotions are very important, and you know, you're putting
Mhm.
yourself in such a vulnerable position, right? So it could be a simple thing of like, this person speaks English way better than I could speak French. I don't know if I'm even worthy to take up their time. And as you said,
Exactly.
time is the currency, right? Another
Yeah.
side of it could just be like, it could be just your communicative style, right? Like whether you
Mhm.
just vibe or not with the person. And
Absolutely.
yeah, like, I mean, there are just, it could be the timetable as well. Like the person you're speaking to
Mhm.
could simply be too busy or in a different time zone. But you know, for
Exactly.
somebody who's jumping on iTalki, I think it's really good that you have that experience, because you know, like, teaching, like, it's hard to even call it teaching, but I suppose supporting a language exchange partner is such a unique way of yeah, teaching your language, or helping, at least
Mhm.
helping facilitate learning of the language, than it is if you
Yes.
are a teacher in front of a group class, right? So what a unique experience you have. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right, great stuff. I think just a couple more questions. Yeah, we spoke about you learning. Oh, yeah, you've brought up a few times about how you haven't been to an English-speaking country. For me,
Yeah.
now that's not a problem at all. Like, I have taught so many students who live in English-speaking countries, and their English aren't good, even close at the level of your English, right?
Mm.
But you know, obviously there is like an there's a very common idea that you know going to a country where they speak the language is so vital, if not absolutely obligatory, for learning a language. So I just want to know, and it's fine if you disagree. Maybe you think it is completely incredibly important. I just want to know, how important do you think it is to live in a country where they speak the language in order to be a proficient speaker?
I believe it absolutely is not obligatory to travel, to evidence by the fact I've learned English. Like I said, without being to an English-speaking country, I've learned Japanese long before I had the opportunity to travel to Japan. Same with Spanish. I've never been to a Spanish speaking country yet. Um, but what I will say in favor of traveling to a country where the language is spoken is that immersion can be a very powerful tool to learn a language. When you find yourself in a situation where as soon as you leave the house, everywhere you look, everything is written in the language you're learning, all the signs, everything else. People passing by are speaking that language. You can hear it everywhere. So it starts to sort of register, at least in terms of the tones and pronunciation of the language, as you start picking up vocabulary and you start getting there. However, that's not an experience. I mean, you can sort of try to replicate immersion without being, it's not as effective, obviously, but you can give it a good go. It's easier with English. English is everywhere. I don't remember the exact percentage, but a very big percent of the internet is written in English, for example, and people speak um, very large of people, the number of people speak it worldwide, if not as a first language, and as a second or third language, etc. However, even with other languages, in terms of Japanese, for example, I'll show you something that I've done and so I have these, I don't know if you can see on the wall there, but they're kanji characters in Japanese, and they have some,
Oh, that's what they
some
are.
yeah, they have some hiragana written, like some notes and things like that behind them. And I have them like around different parts of the house. Uh, I've started to forget a lot of kanji now, but before, when I was preparing to take a JLPT, which is a Japanese language proficiency test, you have to, this is one of the hardest parts about learning a language such as Japanese, it's the writing system, because they have three writing systems, but you have to know all three to be able to, say, read a newspaper, for example, in Japan. And the kanji are basically Chinese pictograms. I wouldn't call them letters because they're, you know, so they're sort of symbols. Like if you want to remember if you want to write, let's say, the word house, you have to remember how to draw the kanji for that specific word, for example. So this helped me a lot because I would just be walking around the house and I'd look at that kanji and I'd remember, oh yeah, that one means voice. Yes, this is the one that I saw in the anime that I was watching the other day, or this thing, something like that. Or, other things that beginners can do, for example, it's just when you're learning vocabulary for objects and tangible things, you can sort of label them like simple things around the house. And I did this a little bit with Japanese a long time ago. So I just I put a note on the refrigerator that says the word reizoku, for example, which means refrigerator in Japanese. And on the table, on a bottle of water, etc. It's very simple things, but it's just, I think it helps you it helps your mind think about that language. And at least you're thinking about, yeah, I have these things, all of these things about Japanese. I haven't done any practice lately. At least seeing the characters, even if even if you've already learned them, or so I think it's, there are a lot of other things you can do in terms of immersion. which simple things like reading the news, which is something everybody does, you can try and read it in your target language every day instead of, there are always resources with like simpler news that's written in a little bit of more of a simple language. You can switch your phone settings to your target language, your, let's say, social media. It's a lot of, there are a lot of suggestions out there, but it does help a lot. Yeah.
Good. All right, great. Just about at the end there, I just wanted to ask you one more about a native speakerism, right? And of course, this is something that has even like a few of the people who I've interviewed this past week, they've spoken about native speakerism. I just want to know what that means to you. Like, has native speakerism, has this kind of concept of a native speaker, has it ever held you back from doing what you want to do as an English teacher?
I don't think it's ever really held me back in regards. So in terms of, I teach what I'm familiar with, what I've learned, which now that I've become an English teacher, I try to familiarize myself with different Englishes, quote unquote. And
Yeah.
so when we get to a, let's say, a word that's spelled differently in British English, American English, I always provide my students with both alternatives. And I'll explain. I noticed earlier that, I don't remember what you're, in what context you're saying it, but you said something, I think you said from A to Z, and then you said
Yeah.
A or A to Z or something like
Yeah.
this. And I was like, that's such a teacher thing, because I do that.
Yeah.
Like I'll say, I'll be teaching animals and I'll say zebra or zebra, or, you know, like,
Yeah.
and then
There
I'll
we
go,
go.
yeah, this is, if you hear people say zebra, that's correct. That just means that person is probably British. And then if they say the other word, it means they're American, etc. So, so you guys, and I get students asking about these things, and students telling me, like trying to correct classmates because they wrote organize with an S, for example. I go, no, it's fine. That's just a different spelling because it's, you know, the British spelling, etc. So I think it's in having a native speaker teach you their language or your target language does have a lot of merit, because they will. One thing that happens a lot is when learning a certain language, and focusing solely on things like textbooks and the resources made for learners, they're not always as accurate in terms of the way the language is actually spoken, and the way, like, people use idioms, they have different ways of speaking the language, etc. So yeah, absolutely, having a native speaker tell you exactly whether a certain word is used at all, or whether it's just something that's formal that you only have to, absolutely. But I think also having someone that's learned the language as your teacher has a lot of merit as well, in terms of the fact that they're familiar with the sort of obstacles and traps that especially if they know your target language as well. So I've taught a lot of the majority of my students so far have been Moroccans. I've taught students from a few different nationalities on occasion when I started teaching online. So I know that Moroccans speak Arabic and speak French, for example. I know that for French speakers, this is something that they struggle to pronounce in English, for example, or these are all the false cognates that they always, like with the word actually in English having a different meaning from actuellement in French, as a quick
Exactly.
example.
False friends.
So
Yeah.
as I've way back when I was a teenager and I started learning English, I used to use actually to mean currently all the time
Yes.
in English, because
Yeah.
in French, that's what it means.
Mm-hmm.
So I've gone through those things, and I know immediately, I know what mistakes these learners are likely to make. So that's one thing that I think someone who actually has had to learn the language, and if they're the bonus being if they're familiar with the learner's language as well, that could be a great combination in my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah, there are definitely a lot of pros for that, and the greater sense of sensitivity for these kinds of differences between different Englishes, as you said. That's something that a lot of native speakers miss out on, right? Like there are a lot of Americans that who simply aren't aware that spelling color with an OUR could be correct, or spelling center
Yeah,
with the TRE could actually be correct,
exactly.
right? And for me as a Canadian, this is really interesting because a lot of our pronunciation I find is influenced by American English, but a lot of our spelling is actually influenced by British English, actually, right?
Mm.
And even the
But
way we
now,
say Z, we will say Z typically in Canada
yes.
rather than Z, right? So there are all different different things like that. So yeah, that is really eye-opening. Thank you so much for sitting down, Khalil. Just one more time, if anybody wants to book a lesson with him, it'll be down in the description box below. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up today?
Well, only that I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and thank you also for all of the comprehensive guides and videos about iTalki. I've looked elsewhere. There are certain articles that you can find in there, but I think the videos that you've made are a lot more in depth and they go into a lot of details. And it's personally, as someone who's considering going into this journey of online talking, it's the most valuable resource is to hear from teachers who have had experience in that field, to hear from the horse's mouth, let's say.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly, exactly.
yeah,
That's it. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm happy that you appreciate that. I'm trying to make sure that with my experience, I'm not losing touch with what other people's experiences are, especially newer teachers to the platform. So I'm glad that you appreciate hearing it from this horse's mouth, and we all hear it from that horse's mouth. Thank you very much, Khalil, and all the best of luck on iTalki. All right.
thank you.
Okay. All the best.